Hey everybody, so today we're going to be doing the draw along drawing of Leo. So far it's middle of January right now as I get ready to draw this. I think about 5 or 6 of you have completed the draw along, and it's been really good. Really pleased to see how much progress some of you are making, and it's great to see. It's interesting whenever you look at someone's work, but when you're all working on the same reference or a similar reference, it's interesting to see how people deal with it and how some people have like often you'll see the same sort of issues. With this one, it was quite straightforward. Most people seem to be really grasping a lot of it. One of the things that I know a couple of you mentioned is having trouble with details. And I mean, this wasn't a great photo. I took it, we were going to do a quick shoot outside and it was raining. And so we took it indoors. There was like fluorescent lights, and all I had was my camera with the built-in flash on it. Like I didn't bring anything else because we had planned on doing it outdoors, but it was the only time the two of us could get together. So, the lighting's not great, and for that reason I'm going to actually work on white. If you look in here, I mean, if I was sort of planning this out, because originally I thought I'll do it on toned, but I mean, aside from the whites in the eyes, you know, there's a tiny bit of a highlight in certain places, but there's not enough that makes me want to really like use the, you know, tone for the base and white for the highlights. We could certainly intensify some of the highlights, but I think that it would be potentially a little bit problematic. And then of course the other thing is you've got the whites of the headphones, so there would be this tendency to really push those, so you'd end up with these two white areas and then the whites in the eyes, and I think that it would be problematic. So it's, you know, certainly I could do it on toned, if like this was the reference that was given to me for commission and they said, you know, we want it on toned paper, I'd make it work. But if, you know, people often ask me, how do you decide what paper you're going to work on? It's sort of decisions like that, right? I'll sit down, I'll look at it, and I'll say, okay, what is going to show up the best on different mediums, right? Sometimes it's the darkness of the hair, sometimes it's the actual highlights, sometimes it's what I want to do with the background, whatever, right? It really varies. There's not necessarily one thing that kind of motivates me to work with one paper or the other, but in this case, because of the lack of really strong highlights and because the whites in there would probably become a little bit overpowering, I decided that white would be the best. So this is just, I think Canson Bristol or something like that. I'm going to start off with an F pencil. If you've watched a lot of these videos, this is actually the same F pencil I've been using for probably, gosh, I don't know, maybe half a year. Obviously I only use it for the block end, but the thing is, as long as you don't break the lead, it lasts forever because it doesn't wear down, right? It's not like you use I'll go through 4Bs, you know, every couple of days, but an F or a 2H or something like that, it'll last for a long time as long as you don't put too much pressure and break the pencil. And certainly if you're using an F or 2H or something like that, you definitely don't want to be putting too much pressure on because you'll damage the paper. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make, obviously this is smaller, I'm going to make him bigger. Let's sort of work out, that's about the size of the face that I want, I think. Leo's got kind of an interesting jaw and chin. And that's certainly something that gave a couple of people problems, I think. But it's, you know, it's just identifying what makes us different. So that's kind of my center line. So again, his head is just slightly turned. So if I'm making a center line down the face, it's actually kind of curved, right? His eyes will be on that curve. Nose. Try and keep this real nice and light. We have to kind of guess what's going on under because he's got the headphones and a lot of, you know, the hoodies and stuff. We're kind of guessing what's going on under. I just want to actually that's a dirty eraser. I just want to soften this a little bit. It's a little bit dark. Sometimes those construction lines can throw you off a little bit if they get too dark. I think that's more like it. And this headphone kind of just sits right under the chin like that. And this one comes around, and there's all these sort of details like the curves and that. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm just making this sort of sweeping. So if we imagine this, what is that called? The headband, I guess, of the headphones, it would sweep around, but it's actually going to come out, I think, a little bit lower. So like that, and then we can connect the other one in there. Okay, so that's enough to kind of give me a sense there. Now his ear is a little bit lower than the nose. That might just be the curve, but in the picture it looks lower than the nose. So we're going to put it like that. Very, very. So sometimes I do that kind of stuff, which has no real value other than to, when I do construction lines, I'll throw a line in. I know that that's the eye, but what if when I come back, I decide, is that the eye or is that the eyebrow? So sometimes I will throw in, like, because the eyebrow is kind of more like this height, I think. So if I throw in this kind of, like that kind of shape, then I know, okay, then this line is the eyes. And, it's me that's putting them in. So you'd say, well, shouldn't you know which lines are which? Yeah, except that as I'm going, sometimes you throw in certain lines and you think, okay, that looks like around where the nose is. And then when you go back, you misinterpret what you'd already worked out, if that makes sense. That's especially important if you're doing like if you're measuring, because if you're measuring with a ruler or with a some sort of tool or whatever, then you've worked all this out, and you go back and if you put things in the wrong place based on your measurements, then you've kind of wasted your time. It's not a big deal, right? It's all part of the process, but we've got his cheekbones here. So a lot of these lines are probably a little bit darker than I would normally go, but as always, this one's more about showing you guys how I work. I think I've talked about this before, but in the corners, I tend to sort of round out where those shapes are, just because that is really, it's never an abrupt sort of thing. The corners of the mouth, because of the lips sort of fade into the face, it's something that people often make a real hard edge when it probably shouldn't be. Okay, so I think that's kind of the basic shape that I want. I'm trying to figure out, I can see a little bit of that ear, like there's just a tiny bit there, but I'm gonna actually ignore it. I think that it'll make it a little bit confusing, but I will sort of put in the hair. I think that's useful or important. He's got that cool. All right. So I think that's good. I'm going to switch to a 2B now. You certainly could switch to like actually maybe I just a little bit more into the ear here while I've got these light areas. You could switch to an HB if you wanted another easier transition, but I feel like I'm comfortable with where my shapes are. I could kind of see Leo coming out in here, but obviously still very early. I just want to double check, make sure that nothing, this nostril's a bit high. You can see this eye is a little bit wider than that one. Everybody's eyes are actually, I mean, that's the thing you notice as you start drawing more. We all think that, everybody's eyes are this and everybody's eyes are, at the same height or the same size or the same width. I mean, that, and of course we've talked about that, especially in like the videos where I talk about likeness. That's what makes us, right? That there are these differences in us, and in fact most people's eyes are not the same size. Okay, so let's start. I think the nose is relatively accurate now, so I want to just start there. So Leo's got a little bit extra space between the, like I think that his nose, if we were to go with that sort of average value sort of scale, or the average, break down what an average person looks like across the world, there's probably a little bit more space between his mouth and his nose than the average person, which is actually because I think his nose is a little bit smaller than you would normally see in a face like that. So that's one of those distinguishing things, and I think there might have been one or two people that had problems with that, and that's normal, right? Like I'm not trying to call anybody out. That is what we're here for, right? To learn how to identify these things, because the drawing itself is not difficult, right? We're just putting lines down on a piece of paper. It's identifying what it is that we're drawing and what makes people unique and that sort of thing. His nose has got some fairly strong shapes. So I've already identified the eyebrows a little bit. This eyebrow is a little bit higher than that one. So just as I think of things and notice them as I go, he actually has quite pointy lips. Like they're not feminine, but they're full for a male. So we want to make sure that we draw attention to that, if you like, because again, that is what makes him him. Make sure I've got quite a few lines here. I want to make sure that I lock in the right ones. Okay, yeah, that's starting to look okay. Now his jaw, as I said, is kind of one of the things that makes him. Or everyone's unique. I was going to say it's one of the things that makes him unique. Everyone's unique. It's one of the things that is unique about. That's a little bit far over. So I have all these lines in. Of course, I lock in the wrong line. One of the things that makes him kind of him is that jaw. So he's got quite a wide sort of jowl and then quite a pointy chin. So we have to kind of draw attention to that. I'm just going to throw a little bit of shade under there. And of course, the placement of the headphones doesn't help. It kind of can be confusing. So, I mean, on the surface, this looks like quite a simple reference. But I think that it is actually, there's some interesting and difficult things about it. So I commend anybody that did it. If you notice in here, he's got quite actually strong area there above between the nose and the lip. So we're going to want to identify that. Yeah, so you guys did really well with this one. Sometimes I can't tell how difficult or easy a reference is going to be until I've drawn it myself. So. Leo is mixed race. He's part Asian. I think his dad is Caucasian and his mom is Japanese. I'm not positive though. But he definitely has mixed race, which he does. His eyes are just a little bit. I don't want to say Asian. A lot of Oriental people don't have the same sort of flap above their eye, which is what makes them look smaller. Which is actually kind of funny because they're not. Eyeballs are almost exactly the same the worldwide. Any ethnicity. I believe that Africans tend to have the slightly larger eyeballs, but it's we're talking millimeters here, and yet it looks that way with I don't want to say Asians because obviously people from India are Asian, but Oriental, I guess, is probably the better term. Tend to their eyes often will look a little bit smaller, and it's because of the different flap above the eye. But Leo doesn't have that, even though he is of Asian or Japanese descent. And that's actually one of the real kind of interesting things as we draw, is trying to see what makes someone look different based on their ethnicity. And I know I've had a couple people ask if I can do some more, more diverse ethnicity drawings, and I'm going to try my best. Unfortunately, where I live, which is a very small town in Canada, there's almost no one of any ethnicity or different ethnicity here. But I do have a couple of models lined up, and of course I can always do celebrities that are of different descent or use stock photos or something. So I will try and do that more. But with the draw alongs, I tend to use only my own reference, so we'll have to see what I can do there. I need to put this line in. Yeah, it's starting to come together now, so we need probably a little bit darks in there, just so that I've got a sense of where everything's going. This right now, like these lines that kind of come out of his nose, are probably a little strong. It's probably not a big deal because we haven't addressed the values there, but I'm just going to soften them a little bit. Okay, and then we have to identify the shapes in here. Okay, and as always, we're trying to keep those lines working with the form, right? Creates it. Starting to feel like Leo. I'm seeing. I don't know if I saw this just as it is right now, whether I'd say, "Oh, that's Leo," but it's getting close. We're probably a little bit far over here based on this, although it's hard to tell. I gotta look at that again. I want to build in some values first, but yeah, that's tough to say. And that's that's one thing that I like to show you guys, that it really isn't like I just sit down and draw, right? There's a lot of times when I'm doing a drawing where I'll say, okay, am I missing something? What do I need to work on here? It doesn't just happen immediately, and that's one of the sort of, I mean, I'm happy to post quick time lapses and stuff, and people seem to like them and that, but one of the traps that happens when you look at those is you think that I got it all right all the time, but because in 15 seconds you'll see an hour's worth of drawing, but when you watch these real-time ones, you can see that I do have to kind of go back and forth and make decisions, and things don't always come together right away. So again, we want to kind of vary the amount of, like, when you look at this, it looks like a pretty solid hard line, but I think that visually it makes more sense if we kind of play in the hard and soft edges. It makes it a more interesting shape and visual. Okay, and that's dark for based on the rest of the values right now, but it is what we're going to need. I just want to maybe touch on those lips a little bit more. So you'll notice that when I draw, you know, it does vary based on the drawing, but most of the time I'll block in, you know, very loosely, and then I'll work on the key features because everything builds off of there. So, you know, the jawline I think is close, but if it's a bit wrong, that's okay. What you don't want is, you know, perfect jawline and have the nose in the wrong place, or the features. You want to build all of these things out from the key points, right? Because if this is all right, and then this needs to be adjusted, it's a lot easier than having to, you know, oh, the nose is too long, so then you fix it, and then you realize, well, the mouth is too low then, right? That's, you know, again, anything can be fixed as long as you're working on a quality paper, but we want to limit the amount of times that we have to redraw something, because first of all, it's not as much fun to have to redraw it, but also, you know, it can become a little bit frustrating and defeating. And also, you know, every time you have to fix something, you have to identify what the problem is. And that can be just as hard as drawing it right the first time. So the more we can kind of get it right, the better. Again, I'm kind of putting in more values here than I need. I'm going to draw right on my reference. I can't see anything. Just because I want to identify his jawline. I know that this gave some people some problems. So you've got one line that kind of comes in. You've got this hair back here that's a bit problematic. The values in here are very, very close. And then you've got the line of the chin and this other line down here. So I think I'm actually pretty close to right on there, but I'm going to just move it in a little bit. And then I think the problem, what's throwing me off when I look here, because when I look at that, I think that looks right. If I cover that up, there's no advantage. But I think the problem is I don't have the neck over where it needs to be. So that what I'm looking at, and again, it's always about comparison. I'm looking at this shape, and that doesn't look right. But when I cover up the neck, that looks right to me. So that says to me that while I have the neck here, right, it actually should be more like this. And that right there, suddenly it all makes sense, right? Did you see that? That before, when I had the line here, that was what I had initially drawn in as my line, it threw off the jaw, but now it all makes sense. So that one line made the big difference. And that's, you know, I can't stress enough when you guys do a drawing and you know, if you get me to critique it, or if you're critiquing it yourself and it's just one tiny thing that'll be a problem, and you think, oh, how did I miss that? It is that simple, right? One line can throw everything off. And so often when I critique, you know, when I go to art schools and they ask me to come in and critique, or you know, when I do it online with you guys or other forums and things, I find that it's just the simplest thing that would make the change. And it's always astounding. You know, people will be like, really? You think that it's just the lip there? I mean, often it is the bottom half of the face for whatever reason. And then once it's changed, they're like, wow, yeah, that's all it was. And as I said, and we've talked about this many, many times before, if you're drawing an elephant or a tiger or whatever, you know, that little bit of a difference would make no difference. But when you're drawing a person, it makes a huge difference, especially if you're drawing a specific person, right? You know, that line made this look like Leo, but if I had left it the way it was, it would have looked like a person. It would have been accurate, right? And that's always part of the thing when we talk about drawing a tiger or whatever, is that, you know, we don't know specific tigers, right? Maybe if you drew a tiger from, you know, the San Diego Zoo, and the zookeeper looked at it and said, well, it doesn't quite look like my tiger. you know, maybe that would make a difference. But for the average person, we don't know our tigers well enough, so we don't notice, you know, when, as long as it's close, we say, oh, what a great tiger, right? So if this draw, if I hadn't corrected that one area, or on some of the drawings that you guys have done, if we weren't looking at it specifically as this is Leo, you might say that's a great drawing, right? So I'm just gonna, this is a piece of crappy card that I've used many, many times. It's probably getting to the point now where you can see there's already dirt on it. So it's probably getting to the point soon where I should retire it. But for now, I'll just use it here. So just an 8B woodless. The 8B woodless, as you guys I'm sure know, I use a lot because it's quite dark. But it's also nice that, like, I don't have it very sharp right now, which is perfect for this hair. I'm not totally going in the direction of the hair yet, and that's partially because he has this kind of crazy, spiky, messy hair. So now I'm kind of going more in the shape of the hair, but at this moment I want to kind of keep the hair sort of fluid. And oh, I should probably watch where my hand is there. I want to keep it kind of fluid and organic, if you like, right? So so probably went a little bit far on those lines, but that's okay. Come in here. And again, so now you can see how the curve around of the hair makes a big difference, right? It's starting to look pretty good. And of course, you know, the hair is not what, as I say, the hair doesn't make the man. But it is when, like, if you look at this picture, one of the first things you see is this, because it's such a sharp, sharp shape compared with, you know, most of the face is very smooth and softer transitions. So now I'm going to kind of, I don't think I'm going to, well, maybe, I was going to say I don't think I'm going to use the tortillon here, but maybe I will just a little bit, not a lot, just to smooth out some of these shapes. But I do want to come in with a sharper pencil once I've done this. Okay, so, and I'm not, you know, if you look at the reference, it's a very, very jet black hair. I'm not going to do that on this drawing. First of all, it's difficult to get super jet black on a white paper. It's a little bit easier on the toned paper. But I don't want to have to build up all my values and connections, so we'll keep it relatively dark like that, but not like crazy dark. Okay, so now just throw an eraser there. So I'm going to use this eraser. I don't know if you can see it on there, but there's a bit of crap on the end from the last drawing. So just take this piece of sandpaper, the sanding block, and clean it up a little bit. And we'll just use it to pick out a few hairs here and there. When you do something like this, like, you don't have to necessarily, like, you don't have to try and pick out specific highlights, but you do have to try and go with the form of the hair. Okay. Because obviously if I made a highlight going like in a different direction or something, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for the hair. So, and there's no highlights over here, but I just want to soften some of that. And same in here, I just want to soften a little bit. Okay. So now if I take a 4B, it doesn't have to be super sharp. I just sharpened it just a touch. You can try and bring in some of these little hairs here. Okay. Now you have to kind of pull into the existing graphite because otherwise it'll look a little disjointed. But it just gives it that little bit extra connection between the hair and the head. And then again, we're going to just pull some of these. I probably went a little bit thick in there. In fact, I know I did, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about that. I don't think that's, you could erase it and thin it out or something, but I don't think that's a big deal. It's it shouldn't affect likeness that much. So we'll just do that. Gonna come in with a sharp edge there. Okay, good. Okay, now, so now that we've got this, we've got a frame of reference as far as how dark we want the darks to go. So I'm gonna do the eyes first. I know I haven't addressed the ear yet, and I will get to that. I promise I won't forget it. I always have to remind myself. So again, still using a 4B here, right? Yeah. So his eyes are quite dark, but there is, there would be a, I don't want to say tendency. There would be I don't know what word I'm looking for, but we would be tempted, temptation maybe, to make those eyes darker, because when we look at the photograph, they are quite dark. But again, you have to try and look past the photo. They are dark. There's no question that he has dark eyes. But if we were to zoom in on this, there's a little bit of brown. And if he were sitting right in front of us, which is much more important, you would see a lot more variation in the color. So we want to make sure that we kind of indicate that, right, as we're drawing. And I'm just going to throw a little bit of shadow in the eyeball. If you look at the picture, people have a tendency to say, okay, eyeballs are white, teeth are white, nostrils are black. So there's certain things that we just kind of assume and believe and don't question. But if you look at this reference, look at his headphones. Those are white. Those are very, very white. Now look at his eyeballs. Right? You can see that the catch light in his eyes are bright white. Right? This is whiter than this. I don't know if this is a shadow or if this part's just gotten worn because of where it is, so it might be dirty. But even still, his eyes are not as white as that. Right? They're much more gray. And that's true for everybody. Nobody has white eyeballs. We live in an age of Photoshop. So when we go to the grocery store and we see a magazine on the shelf, people always have these super white teeth. They always have these super white eyes. And generally, that's been touched up in Photoshop, especially the eyes. You can use the dodge tool and just lighten the areas in there and even lighten the color in the eye and stuff, right? In reality, it's more like this, right? That it isn't, unless it's really caught the light in some way. There's always a shadow on the eyeball, pretty much. I need to pick out just a little bit. There's a little bit of a light there that I missed. And it's understanding those value changes that make a huge difference when you're drawing. So he's got quite an interesting nose. It kind of goes in here and then bulges out. It's quite a nice nose to draw. And then his eyebrows are actually not as dark as you might think with that super dark hair. So I'm just throwing a little bit more. Over here, actually, it sort of tapers off. I probably went a bit too dark in there, so we're just going to lift some of that out. And then just a couple of extra hairs in there. Extra hairs in there. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty decent. Okay, that's pretty good. He has a little bit of stubble, but not a ton. Okay. I should definitely address that ear now, right? I don't know what it is about me and ears. I just don't love drawing them. I don't know. They're sort of odd shapes. Okay, so we've got, thankfully I did block it in, I think, accurately. It looks pretty good. There's this little curve right here. This shape in there. And I'm actually using a 4B still, I think. Yeah. I'm actually gonna, there's a tiny bit of hair in here. I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger. Just because I like it there. I think it's useful. It kind of balances things out, but it needs to be just a little bit bigger than what it is, because in the photograph it kind of is a bit distracting. So I would say, like, there is a situation where either you should include it and make it a bit more aggressive or dramatic, or don't include it, right? One or the other. All right, there's an ear. How are we doing on time now? Yeah, about 40 minutes in. Starting to come together nicely. So yeah, and you notice that I am still using a 4B, which is okay. It's probably darker than I need at this stage, but I'm using a real light touch. So there's a dirty spot in here, probably from this paper. Better than my oils of my hand, I guess. But I am actually going to switch to a 2B now, because I feel like this will start getting too dark. Just going to take that construction line out. So the lower half of the face, I haven't done much in the way of values yet, but I figured let's try and get this relatively finished at the top, just so I'm not smudging it as I go. Still haven't figured out what kind of a level of finish I want on this, but my guess is probably top half of the face is pretty close to done as far as how finished I want to go on this demo. Yeah. Okay, so let's see about that nose now. So part of the and again, some people had I'm just going to take a drink here, I'm sorry. So some people had problems with some of the details, the values, the shading, and that is, as I said, blame me as a photographer. It's not a great photograph, but there's some areas that are a little bit tricky to kind of understand. So we're going to have to kind of make some assumptions. This nostril, for example, it curves around and then it goes up like that. And I often do draw on my reference if it's something that I've printed out. Just gives you a little bit more to go on. So like I have this line up here. I think that was just a shading line, but in reality, let's see if we can lock in. I don't want to go too dark with these lines, but in reality, it goes probably more like that. Okay, so when I look at an area, sometimes when they are very similar in color, it's hard to tell which side should be darker in the values. And so I will actually like just really closely look and say, okay, this part over here is lighter than the nostril. So this part has to be a bit darker. That can be, I mean, once you see it, you're like, oh, that's not difficult to understand. But when you're doing it, sometimes you think one area is actually darker, and so you'll darken the nostril when in fact the nostril is lighter than the skin around it. It's difficult to explain. It's sort of because we're talking about, skin is all the same color on every part of the face, or very close. So you may have, especially with men, if they have stubble and stuff, the skin may be a bit darker towards the bottom of the face, but essentially it's the same colors. If you think about a room, right, your bedroom or your living room or something, and the paint is all the same color on every wall, but when you look at the walls, it looks like it's different colors because of the shading and the shadows and stuff, right? And it's the same thing with the face. Is the skin is essentially the same color. Yeah, there may be more red, or there may be around the nose or the cheeks, or there may be, as I said, it may be a bit darker, a bit more green around the bottom of the face because of stubble or something. But in reality, it's pretty close. So the thing is, we have to identify how do we determine what areas are darker and what areas are lighter? Because sometimes it's not as simple, right? Like we can look at the nostrils and say dark, right? Black in there. But when we look at the transition between the nose and the eyes, or the nose and the cheek, it's sometimes a lot more difficult to kind of get that and understand which should be which. And it just comes with practice. But as I've said many, many, many times, the real trick here is not training your hands, it's training your eyes. Your hands, there's certainly training that is involved, but it doesn't take anywhere near as long to train your hands as it does to train your eyes. Your eyes are something that can take a lifetime to train, really, because you need to be able to see what it is that, and identify what it is that is wrong, what it is that is right about a drawing, what makes someone look like them. So we're just putting in a bit of shade here. I'll probably look at those headphones pretty quick too. Yeah, Leo, as I said, is a DJ. He did anyway, DJ all over the world right now. I don't think anybody's doing anything because of COVID, but he does a lot of beats and stuff. But he also, when I first met him, he was a sushi chef and was very, very good at making sushi. So okay, so this line here is probably just a little bit too much. It's not inaccurate, but it's just a little bit harsh. And maybe if we were doing more rendering on it, maybe if we were really kind of putting in a lot of values, maybe we would leave it and not worry about it. But I don't think I'm going to go super dark in that area. So sometimes you have to take out those construction lines, and that doesn't mean that they were too dark or that they were wrong. It's just that at this stage you don't necessarily want them there anymore. To just put in a little bit. So that shape is his cheekbones there. Do a little bit here. I do want to just address the stubble a little bit. So what I did there is I just threw a little bit darker area right in where the stubble is. Okay, and then we're going to take a pencil. So this is an 8B, which is really nice and soft, and it's very dull. And I'm just tapping, not very hard, just over and over in that area, and you can see how it kind of starts to build it up. I find that this can, I mean, in his case, it's great because it's very subtle stubble. That's a hard one to say. But if it was more like if he had darker stubble, or if his hair was a bit longer or something, then I find it to be a little bit not time consuming, but it's hard to be patient with it because you want to go faster. You want to build up that stuff quicker, but it does take time, as you can see. In his case, it doesn't matter because it's just a little bit. Now, the funny thing is, as you, and I've talked about this many times, as you start to build up, you can see like the nose now, I'm like, oh, that needs to be darker. Or the lips need to be darker or whatever, but that's okay. So there's enough there. I'm just going to really, really quickly add a little bit more value to the lips because I want to wrap this up relatively soon. It's not that I want to rush, but I know these videos can be a little bit long to watch if we're over an hour. We're already 47 minutes into it, and I want to address the headphones and stuff still. So I'm just going to do a real quick value adjustment on the nose. So again, it's all about building up those layers, right? We were talking about rendering and in the video last week. You can see that as you build up these layers, you know, I smudged a little bit with my finger around here, but for the most part, when I blend, it's all about using the pencil to blend, right? And identifying those areas. Okay. Okay, and then we got a little bit of the highlight there, and I'm going to just actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like this, so that sort of softens that edge, and then I'm going to pick out the white again to give it a stronger highlight. Okay, so you can see it's just sort of all about being subtle and making the transitions nice and soft. Okay, so let's work on those headphones a little bit. I don't want to put too much detail in them, obviously, because this is what it's about. The headphones are kind of nice to have as a sort of secondary, like this is what I'm about. It's sort of tricky. Oh, I shouldn't be using a 4B. Like I'm using a super light touch and it's still coming through like still coming through really dark. Curves can be tough. You know, you can use things like I can reach this without dropping everything. You can use things like this. These are architects. These are circles, of course, but I have ones that are curves and stuff, where you can use different tools. But honestly, because we're not, you know, this is not an architectural rendering or anything. This is just a portrait. I don't think that you need to get that specific or specialized with your curves. So I think that drawing them by hand is probably okay. Let's see here. So the headphones pose a bit of a challenge because you have like this part really sort of strong, sharp edges, and then the foamy part that rests against your head is actually quite soft. So we want to kind of be aware of that. Right, so that's a real sort of soft curve, whereas this one is very hard. And if we kind of make note of that and not really like stress it, but if we sort of show it in our drawing, it actually makes it a little bit more interesting or accurate. So this is the foamy part. And it's black, but I don't want to go too black with it because I don't want to take away from the face. So the decision of how detailed to get on the headphones is a personal one, because you know it could potentially take away from the rest of the drawing. There's not always a right or wrong. You know, I often, when I'm doing, especially sketches, maybe not so much in the finished portraits, but especially with these sort of quick sketches, I often make a decision like, okay, I'm not going to spend much time on the clothing, or I'm not going to put a lot of detail into the clothing. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes I think it's wrong. I look back at a piece and I'm like, yeah, I should have probably spent a little bit more time on that. It's not a question of not wanting to spend the time on it. That's probably inaccurate. It's more like I look at it and I say, will this add value to the portrait? Will it make it more interesting? Will it make it more finished? Will it, you know, like what is the value of you know, spending time on this one aspect? And if I feel like it's not going to help, or more importantly, if I feel like it's going to detract from the portrait, then I will often leave it out, or keep it very, very, very simple. And you can see as I block in the areas, I kind of get less detailed with things, right? You know, and the thing is, you don't have to explain the whole thing. Like, you don't have to. If people look at this, they don't have to know that he's wearing a hoodie. They don't have to know, you know, all of the shapes involved. So, because I when I look at it, I'm like, I'm not sure if that really reads as a hoodie. It doesn't have to, right? They understand that he's wearing something. You never want to confuse your viewers when you do a drawing. And of course, this is assuming that you're even going to show it to anyone. Maybe this is just for you. But I mean, art is communication, so I assume that you're going to want to. There's a logo on the side of the thing. I'm not going to include that because I don't, you know, it's not a drawing for an ad or something. So I think it's pretty obvious he's wearing headphones. That's really the goal there. Okay, so now I'm going to just put in a bit of... So I think I want to put in these values here just so I get a sense. Yeah, I think I want to go a little darker on the headphones. Not a lot, but just enough to sort of... So, and maybe not the whole headphones. I'll show you what I mean. I like this sort of loose energy. I think that it gives it, well, it gives it energy. It gives it kind of an interesting finish. I want to just, even though this kind of melds into one on the drawing, I want to just give it a little bit more of a break so that people know what the heck is going on here. That's the headphone arm. We're going to make this a little bit darker, just so it makes sense. This goes up like this. Okay, and then the same over here. We're going to come in like that. Okay, and then we can actually put a little bit of shade on the white part. Okay, I don't have to get too finicky about this, but whenever I go over a line like that, I normally will just try and clean it up a little bit. It just annoys me more than anything. It's not super important, but and then I think we just need to add a little bit more value in here, and then we're probably done. Yeah, we're right at about an hour now, so that's good. And obviously, I mean, I can continue to add in more values and more detail and whatever, but I think you get the general gist of it. And I probably will add a little bit more at some point, but maybe not today. We'll see. And it's just those sort of soft transitions that we're going to keep building up on. Okay. If there's anything else I kind of want to address here. And I can add a little bit more stubble just with this 4B. So I got to be careful because it's a bit sharper. So I don't want it too, like I don't want the little dots to be too kind of dark, right? I want to keep it nice and soft in there. All right. So yeah, I think that's about it for now. Hopefully that makes sense, and there's it helped you guys. For those of you that have already drawn Leo, I hope that you found it interesting and useful. See someone else using the same reference. If you probably need to do a bit more work on the ear. if you haven't drawn Leo and you're thinking about working along with this video, hopefully you find it helpful. And yeah, just generally. Let me know if there's anything you want to see in particular. Hope everybody is staying well, staying safe, and yeah, we'll talk soon. All right. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.